This is Catherine Parker from The Haunting of Hill House. You're listening to Derek Thomas and the Monday Morning Critic podcast.
Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. I would have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went a different way, partner. It has been a tragedy for this court to see the total waste of humanity that we have experienced here. I don't have any animosity toward you. I want you to know that. Take care of yourself.
My next guest is a writer whose amazing work on Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile can be found on Netflix. He is just a fantastic writer. His name is Michael Werwie. Michael, first off, I told you off air, congratulations. And two, what an amazing movie.
Thank you, Derek. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So I don't know where to start. So I'm going to tell you this. So I've had 20 directors, 90 actors, 20 authors. That's ballpark, right? You're the second screenwriter I've had. I'll have you know that the first one I had in November. A couple months later, went on to win a Golden Globe and an Academy Award. I just want you to know that.
Well, I'm in good company then. That's very flattering.
Well, you're a good company, but I also want to know what could be ahead for you. I'm just throwing it out there.
I can't say that publicly, Derek, but I appreciate you bringing that fact. Fingers crossed.
Yes, absolutely. So as I said, congratulations. Great film. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. You mentioned off air, and I knew this. You were born in Milwaukee. You went to USC. So you clearly have a love of writing. So let's kind of start in Milwaukee a little bit. I heard in an interview, and I try to do accurate research whenever I can. You're a big Jaws fan, and boy, does your love of movies take over from there, right?
Absolutely. I think I saw Jaws way too young. It probably traumatized me in the way possible. I saw that movie before I knew how to spell. So I started storytelling as an artist. I would draw shark attack stories when I was probably 5 years old, and it just kind of evolved from there. Once I did learn how to write, I would borrow the neighbor's typewriter to make it look like an official novel. I bought Sid Field and Final Draft when I was 11 years old. I started very young, and I wrote 3 features by the time I graduated high school. I went to USC where I did not study writing. Actually, I studied business. I don't think I had the courage to call myself a writer at that point, but it was always my secret passion to pursue that once I graduated, which I did. I took a bartending job, and for 10 years just wrote a lot of really bad scripts.
Yeah, but you had a triple minor that included film, right? Film study. Am I wrong with that?
That's correct. I minored in psychology, Spanish, and film, although the film classes I took were more business-oriented. They were about the marketing and distribution of the film industry in general. The writing I always knew I would have to do on my own regardless. Writing is kind of an accumulation of hours, and I knew that, luckily, from a very young age, and I just kind of plowed away at that on my own time while I studied things that I thought would be more interesting and more relevant. And I did enjoy studying business, honestly. It was more the human side of business. It was the managerial stuff. It was the negotiation, persuasion, power politics, and influence. I think all of that served me in the writing as well. For a brief period of time, I thought I wanted to pay the bills as an investment banker while I wrote screenplays on the side. I did some brief internships in that arena. It was interesting, but I was just too drained at the end of the day to focus any creative energy. So that got nixed very quickly.
Yeah, your early work might have been, in your words, bad, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say you won the Academy Nicholl Fellowship Award for screenwriting. So it's safe to say you improved slightly.
I like to look back on it and see an upward trajectory. And I could see little success stories along the way, even when I was struggling. I did win the Nicholl Fellowship. I won it with Extremely Wicked in 2012. I had entered that competition 29 times over 10 years.
Wow.
And so over those 10 years, I had made progress in the competition. I had made the quarters, I had made the semifinals, and that all kind of gave me a little boost career-wise here and there, but I still was never able to get that momentum big enough to start working professionally. And it wasn't until Extremely Wicked, before it won, it became a finalist, and at that point, kind of everything happened almost overnight as far as the awareness is concerned. the working life of a writer still took another year for me to get a real job. But yeah, the nickel is what changed my life professionally.
And one more question about when you were younger, you did shoot movies on VHS. I mean, you're clearly a super fan at this point. Why writing and not so like acting, right? Because you're a good looking guy. I've seen you before. You're clearly talented. Why the path of writing and not acting or another field related to movie making or cinema?
I think I always knew that creativity begins with writing, whether it's literal or metaphorical. I mean, you are, in a sense, giving birth to a story. And that was always very appealing to me. It affords a lot of control. It is something that can be done in a very solitary fashion in the beginning while you kind of figure out what it is you want to do. I think it's very rewarding just on a personal level. And I'm a very introverted, shy person. I work better behind a computer. I never had any desire to be in front of the camera. I have all the respect for actors and what they do, but writing has just kind of always been my first love. And I love that anybody can write. You don't need to be cast in a role. You don't need to be given $1 million to shoot a movie, and you don't need special equipment. You just need your brain. And so it was the easiest thing to self-start, but I also find it one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, and it remains so. Even though I've done upwards of 20 feature screenplays by this point, I still feel like I'm starting over from scratch with my toolkit every time I start a new project, and I like that challenge.
Yeah, and anybody that says that backbone isn't that writing isn't the backbone of anything, TV, film, books, whatever, is simply being less than truthful, because writing is at the core of everything. Am I being a little bit over the top with that, Michael, or am I accurate with that?
I think you're accurate in that it's at the core, but film especially is also a very collaborative medium, and I think also in that core it comes on your filmmaker, and we had a wonderful one in Joe Berlinger in this movie, a strong producer. It all began with Michael Costigan on Extremely Wicked, who kind of was. He and I had partnered from the beginning as far as the vision that we wanted to achieve. And then, of course, the cast. And then you get the financing and you get all the department heads. But that is all built upon the vision of the script. And that's not to say the vision does not evolve and does not change along the way. It absolutely does. And in the best cases, you want it to, because you want people working at their A game in departments that have knowledge above and beyond anything that I could have come up with as a writer. My job, I look at, is to put the intention down, and then I want smarter, more talented people to extrapolate that beyond what I could have imagined. And that was kind of the experience I had with Extremely Wicked, where I wouldn't change a single thing with the film at this point. I'm so happy with how it came out, and I think a lot of that is the strength of the script. But then people start to gravitate towards that script with similar visions, and so you have a unified team working towards a common goal.
Yeah, that's well said. And let me ask you, Michael, there's one thing. You were credited, and you just mentioned it kind of, as executive producer. So I think I know a lot about movies. Explain to me, and to maybe those listening that aren't completely sure, what the title executive producer means. And I know it sounds like such a lame, basic, elementary question, but it's like there's a lot of people that see it and are like, okay, but they don't understand it, right? So what does executive producer mean?
The producer credits in the feature world are a bit nebulous, to say the least. In this respect, I was kind of a steward of this project, obviously from the start of it. I mean, I wrote this 9 years ago, and for the majority of that time, it was just me and the script. But after the Nickel Fellowship win, and Michael Costigan, our producer, came on, it was kind of he and I for the next 5 or 6 years, just trying to put this thing together with the right director, the right actor, find the financing. And we always had several of those elements, but never all at the same time. But through that process, I was adamant that I wanted to get the right combination of people involved. I did not want to lose control of it before we knew what that core team was. And so I decided not to sell the script, not to option the script until we had our director, our actor, and our financing, and we were ready to go. And so I think the compensation, so to speak, for taking that risk is I was on the project as an executive producer, and that, the full-fledged producer of this is hands down Michael Costigan. Michael Simkin came on later on. He's Zac Efron's producing partner, and of course Nick Chartier, who financed the movie, all played integral roles. But for the almost 9 years of grinding, my job was to help make the decisions along the way to realize the movie that we all wanted to make.
Yeah, and that makes much more sense. And when I think of screenwriters, going back to your other title, and the one you're just phenomenal at, I think of Coen Brothers, I think of Tarantino, I certainly think of Taylor Sheridan, John Hughes, Steve Zalian, Frank Darabont. Who has inspired you, right? So whether USC or whether your bartending days or even now, who's a screenwriter where you look at, you're like, I just really enjoy his work or her work?
Well, if we're talking just screenwriters, because I take inspiration from so many disparate areas, but if we're just looking at the career of screenwriters, I think, to me, the most impressive writers are working today are, Tony Gilroy and Scott Frank. I mean, I just love the body of work that they've done. There's so many different genres. They are craftsmen. They do kind of parachute in and solve problems, but they also self-generate and write a lot of original material. They're directing, they're executive producing. I look at writers like John August and Craig Mazin, who are, giving back to the screenwriting community in such a huge way through their podcast. It's just really inspiring to see, writers like that who have reached a level of success and are still working at a very high level, but also are giving back to the community. It's something that I think is really important to do. Billy Ray is another name that comes to mind. He was the keynote speaker the year that I won the Nickel Fellowship, and he was so kind to offer his eyes and ears, like whenever I have questions, and I have reached out to him for some kind of mentorship when I knew nobody else would be able to relate to certain questions I had. So those are the writers I think that I look up to. As far as just pure influences, I mean, my influences stretch up across music and theater and authors and everywhere.
No, that's well said. And John August's work in Big Fish is just simply amazing. I still am blown away by that, 15 years later. So I know this screenplay took you a long time to write, and I'm going to ask you why, but not in a way like, what the heck took you so long, but why, in a sense that it did take a long time. Is it because you look at things and you're a revisionist and you kind of keep wanting to redo things, or is it just simply, look, that's when I was happy with the final product?
Well, I should say the movie took a long time to come together. This script actually was one of the faster ones for me to write. Okay. I never intended to write a movie about Ted Bundy. I want to put that out there. I was, at the time, a struggling writer. I was a bartender, and I was writing a much more commercial spec script that, on the surface seemed like it was a wiser decision for an aspiring writer trying to break in. I just didn't care about the material at all. I was blocked. I was stuck. I was procrastinating, and I picked up a true crime book that happened to be about Ted Bundy. I didn't know much about his story, and I was surprised how many of these crazy details I just had no idea this was a reality. So that kind of turned into an obsession of trying to learn as much as possible about his life and those around him. And I was especially captivated by all these nonviolent details in his life. So I really read everything I could find written by a primary source, people who actually knew him during his life. And then the script came together very quickly. I think I wrote the first draft in maybe 3 or 4 months, which for me is lightning fast. I spent another several months rewriting it, and then I just sent it off to the Nickel and honestly forgot about it. I never thought it would do anything for my career. It was kind of the worst pitch in the room, a love story starring Ted Bundy. Nobody really got it. But to the Academy's credit, I think I went through something like 18 readers to finally win that thing. They saw the potential in it, and eventually everybody else did too, which is just the first step in the process. I mean, that was only 2 years into my 9-year journey, because at that point, everybody reads the script and loves the script and passes it around, and it was my kind of calling card, and it broke me into the industry, and it got me working professionally. I've done a lot of work for the studios since then. But it's a tough story to tell. It's a tough movie to make. And it just took that long for the stars to align, to find the right director, the right actor, and the financing. So that was a good probably 6 years of work after the Nickel to finally put that together and make it a reality. And that's why, to this day, it is about 9 going on 10 years. Wow.
And the other thing I want to ask you is, and yes, I do have Google, but what is the Blacklist? Explain that to me. So everywhere I read, I obviously I Google whatever, but I'd rather have you tell me what the blacklist is, because it sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a really good thing, right?
It's a great thing. It's a dream that I've had for a long time to make that list. And what it is, the original blacklist, there's a blacklist website, and then there's the annual blacklist. It's run by the same person, Franklin Leonard, but the annual blacklist is kind of an informal polling of several hundred executives, people around the industry, an informal polling of their most liked scripts, unproduced scripts in a calendar year. And so this is just kind of people, kind of ranking maybe their top 10 scripts that were their favorites that year that have yet to be made. And I was fortunate enough to be included on that list. And there's some pretty impressive, there's an impressive pedigree of writers who have come from this list. I mean, and projects. The Social Network was on there, Slumdog Millionaire, Juno, The King's Speech. A lot of these movies go on to become really well done films and movies that have endured. And just to be included was an honor. And I'm so happy about it.
Michael, and that's what bothers me, right? Because there's so many great writers like you, and you mentioned about 6 great scripts that were out there. Why are people wasting their time with remakes when there's so many great writers out there just producing things ready to get made, but sometimes studios turn to, hey, let's remake this movie that has a completely unnecessary remake ready to go. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, why not introduce the audience to something new and fresh and expose these writers that are so talented and so gifted like you are? Why aren't they going for the new and fresh as opposed to, like, remakes? And do you get what I'm saying a little bit?
I hope the tide is starting to turn. There is an appetite for just well-told original stories.
Yes.
And luckily there are some companies that are coming in and filling those gaps, and they're doing so with an economic model that's feasible. The studio system, I think, is a model that requires a tremendous financial investment, and that goes beyond just the production of a movie. It requires marketing and awareness and all sorts of expenditures that, to them, it's kind of a spreadsheet calculation where how can you mitigate the most risk while trying to get the biggest upside. And that's their business model. And that's a business model that has worked well for them. We'll see if it's sustainable, but a company like Netflix or Amazon or any of the streamers are coming in now and starting to make those kind of mid-budget genre movies that I grew up loving in the 80s and 90s. There were a lot more risks taken on original material, and I hope that continues. And I think the Blacklist has been championing voices like that. But again, I think a lot of these projects, my own included, are very risky endeavors going into it. A lot of them are execution dependent, and it requires getting the right team around it that all are making the same movie. And that's hard to do. That's very hard to do. And I've seen it firsthand now going forward on this project. We got lucky. We had some very talented people. But my hope is that with the success of certain movies that are more challenging subject matter and more original ideas, that it will start to beget other challenging movies and interesting stories, because there's an appetite for them, no doubt.
Yeah, and I have to say, as I'm watching Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, people say, well, how was it? Because I post things, they're like, well, how was it? How was it? And when I tell them what I thought of the movie, like my first sentence, people think I'm a lunatic. I said I cried. Like, I did. Like there's a lot of emotions, right? So there's a ton of emotions. But there's an awesome... I'm going to get to this a little later. There's a scene in the courtroom between Malkovich and Zac Efron. I'm telling you, Michael, it brought me to tears. And I know it actually happened because they show it, for those that haven't seen it, afterwards in the post-credits. But I got to say, it just brought me to tears. Do I need to see a therapist, or is that an okay reaction?
It's an okay reaction. And I think, this is a challenging movie in that it requires, at times, uncomfortable emotion. And, we were telling a story of seduction and deception and betrayal. And ultimately, it's about the truth. And in order to get to that point, in order to have the emotional impact, it requires us to buy into a love story. And that's uncomfortable, especially given the knowledge that most people have going into this movie about what this is all about. And I think the fact that this is not a violent movie, this is more of a con man story. It's told through the lens of a love story purposefully, because the aim was to put the viewer in the same emotional point of view as Liz, Ted's girlfriend, and ultimately the American public once they watched his, the first nationally broadcast live trial. in order to have that kind of turn, as we start to be reminded of, oh yes, this is actually a truly atrocious, awful human being, it's meant to create some cognitive dissonance, and you're feeling one thing, but your intellectual mind knows something else, and it becomes an interesting mix of emotion by the time you get to the end. And if it's successful, hopefully we've caused you to think and feel at the same time.
No, that's really well said. And one of the things that, I'm looking at IMDb now, it's got a 6.7. That is such an unfair evaluation of this movie. This movie's at least an 8, if not higher. And that's just basing on scores. But I'm going to tell you why that's the point. Because I think people went into this movie thinking, oh, I'm going to see a Silence of the Lambs type. But what they don't realize, and I think a lot of people realize afterwards, is you guys effectively told a beautiful story, not a beautiful story, but an effective story that it's a different perspective on it. And you don't need to see Ted Bundy kill a bunch of people to understand where you're going with this. There's a scene, where she approaches, and I know you know this, she approaches him in jail, she's talking to him, and I have to be very careful what I say here because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but he communicates to her that, he actually did these crimes. And there's a scene after that. That's all you need to see. There's no need to see 30 people die in this movie. And I really appreciate the point you and Joe came from while telling the story.
Yeah, we are aware that that there are some truly awful things in this story. The crimes and the reporting on those crimes has been done ad nauseum and done quite well. Yep. And there have been many movies in the serial killer genre that have been revolutionary. There's been some that have not been that great, but it's so hard to do something from a unique point of view in an otherwise familiar genre. And I was really excited at by the fact of telling a serial killer story with no serial killing in it. We weren't interested in telling a slasher movie. We wanted to examine the human dynamics and really kind of look at it through a victim's perspective, because Liz herself was a victim of sorts. She was gaslit by this man for years. And that's something that I haven't seen before, and I really wanted to explore. And we took a risk, and I think, again, I will go on record saying I'm very proud of what we did, and I think people were a little confused about what they were supposed to be watching, and I truly believe that it's going to age well once there's more conversation about it. But we achieved our goals, and I think we did it respectfully and tastefully, and we were very aware of the sensitivity of the subject matter and of the surviving victim families. We in no way wanted to disrespect anybody who had any tangential connection to this case, and that was first and foremost on our minds as we were making it.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying this because I invited you and I'm speaking with you. I loved it, and it's a phenomenal movie, and I think anybody that gives it a chance will see what I'm saying. Michael, how protective are you of this script? Right? You're the screenwriter. When you meet with Joe, does Joe ever say, like, because Joe's the director, does he ever say, you know what, I don't like this, I kind of like this? Are you open to kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say editing, but are you, is it kind of a fixed thing, or is it open to negotiation? As a screenwriter, when you approach Joe, how does that rapport work?
You have to be open to it. I mean, that's just how it works in the feature world. The director is steering the ship at that point. Ideally, you want to have a partnership and you want to have a healthy collaboration. And with Joe, I believe we did. And Joe's a very strong filmmaker with a very bold point of view and he has strong convictions. And I thought that was great. That's exactly what you want in somebody who's going to steer this ship. And Joe is not afraid to say, I don't like this, let's change this, here's an idea. And we had a dialogue, and it wasn't just Joe and I, it was the producers as well. It was at one point the actors come on board. It becomes a conversation, and even though things may feel painful in the moment, because I had lived with it for so long, ultimately you have to accept that this is a process and we're all working towards the same end. And I truly believe we were all seeing the same movie, and so any type of criticism that came in, I took it to heart, and I fought back when it was time to fight back, and I incorporated the notes when I felt that it would make the story stronger. But at the end of the day, I'm a steward of the story, and we're making a movie, and it's no longer a document. And at that point, the train is rolling, and luckily we had a lot of smart people with some very, very good creative instincts on this movie.
spending so long on this script, does it take a toll on you, Michael? Does it ever get to the point where, I mean, you're writing about Ted Bundy, you're writing about people who have been affected by it, but as a writer, does it affect you? Does it does it ever wear on you mentally?
I'm sure it does in certain ways. This one, because we were telling it from a very specific point of view and because we weren't dealing with the gruesomeness of the crimes, obviously I was aware of all those details, but they weren't front and center in my mind every day as I was working on it. That said, 9 years with Ted Bundy is quite a long time. So it's nice to move on from that, but I have done a lot of work in true crime and adapting true stories that involve dark subject matter where it does get a bit heavy at times, but then I just have to take a step back and remember, I'm performing a function here. I'm telling a story. I'm working my craft, and I can fall back on those tools, which helps me get through the day.
Yeah, and it's a unique cast. It's an original cast. I love the casting here. But when you write like this, do you in your own mind say, you know what, I'd love so and so to play Liz, or you know what, this person would make a good Ted Bundy? And I'm not saying you're unhappy with who was cast. Zac Efron's amazing. Lily Collins is amazing. They were perfect for this. But do you, as a writer, ever say, you know what, in the beginning, where you're like, this actor would make a great Ted Bundy? Does that ever happen as a screenwriter?
I don't let that happen because I've been writing long enough to know that you're never going to get those people anyways, so why waste the effort?
Right.
It's funny when I write scripts, whether they're based on real people or completely fictional, I don't really have a specific physical image in my mind. I kind of just feel the energy of the character, as weird as that sounds. But in the case of this movie, I could not be more proud of the cast, and I can't see it any other way than Zach and Lily and everybody else that we cast in this. I thought it was the exact perfect casting for each role, and it's hard to even imagine my version of the movie before this all came together, because I think everybody was cast in the roles that they were meant to play. Yeah,
that's well said. And like I said, there's not a person I would recast. It's so perfect. There's a time where I caught myself watching this, Michael, where I'm looking at Zac Efron, and I forgot he was Zac Efron, and he absolutely sold me on being Ted Bundy. And I'm looking at his teeth, as he's speaking, and I'm like, holy cow! I had to shake my head back, and I'm like, this is Zac Efron. This is not when I looked. There was just a moment where I looked at him, and I'm like, he really sold me. So I mean, absolutely beautiful performance by all these actors.
It's scary how chameleonic he is,
Yes.
And I completely agree, and I think this is kind of another sign that this movie happened when it was supposed to happen, because had it happened 9 years ago, Zach would not have been old enough to play this role. I think the world had to change in a way. He had to age into this role, and the stars had to align in some weird cosmic way for the right combination of people to come together and make it. And I'm really happy with how it came out.
So if you had the opportunity, I realize you're not a reporter, but if you had the opportunity when you were writing this, are there things you wish you could have asked Ted Bundy? Not outside of why and outside of the things that everyone else wants to know. Is there something you really wanted to ask him if the opportunity presented itself that you would have asked? What's the type of question you maybe kind of kept going through your mind? Or do you get what I'm saying? Is there a question that you just were dying to just know?
It's an interesting question, and I understand where you're coming from. But honestly, I can't say that there's anything that I would have sought him out for, because it's a kind of a deceptive story in that it's not really about him. We didn't want to, and I feel there's some questions about this before about why we didn't get into the psychology of his character and incidents from his past and traumas and whatnot. And it's because there's no consensus as to what may have caused this, what may have led him down this path. I don't think it's any one or two or three things. I think it's a culmination of thousands of choices that he made along his way that kind of deviated him from an otherwise normal path. And the common thread in everybody who's dealt with him, whether it's friends, lovers, family members, detectives, cops, journalists, is that you always had a sense that he was manipulating you in the end anyways. And I don't think asking him any question is going to get any kind of a resolution. It might just get more questions. And that was kind of the fascinating thing about Ted Bundy, the character, is that he's so skilled at compartmentalizing reality that you could live in whatever reality his agenda needed. And in this case, it was a seductive love story type agenda. But there's some great books about the cops getting the final confessions from him in the last couple of days of his life, which they talk about. It would take 3 hours for him to just get up to the culmination of one case and get to the details that they were looking for to corroborate everything. So he was very skilled at manipulation and at kind of deviating the conversation away from your motives towards his own. He always had some kind of ulterior agenda.
And speaking of police, James Hetfield of Metallica fame absolutely does a great job as one of the police officers.
Oh, he's awesome. Yeah, James did such a great role.
Yeah, so let me ask. So we get the victims. It's heartbreaking. They say Ted killed 30. It might have been closer to 100, they say, which is unbelievable, maybe more. But what I found myself really feeling really just distraught over was certainly Liz. But the one that nobody really talks about that I'm heartbroken for is the mother. Like, I don't know. I felt she doesn't have a huge role in the movie. But when they show the real mom at the end and the mother on, the actress who plays the mother, I don't know, Michael. I really just felt so bad for the mother as well.
Yeah, I think the tragic thing about this story and about these types of stories in general is all of the collateral damage that goes on around the person who is guilty of the crimes, and that goes to their intimate relationships, their platonic relationships, their coworkers, their family members. There are several layers of victims when you extrapolate beyond just the man, and his mother is absolutely one of them. And there's so many things we could have explored with that relationship had we had more narrative time. That was one of the difficult things about writing the script, is figuring out where to focus the narrative energy. But she's a fascinating character, and they have their own backstory together.
Yeah, and Michael, I never found myself with this, and I watched it 3 times. I never found myself saying, I wish that. I was so happy with the complete story. I have to ask you more as a movie lover than a screenwriter here. Why does Liz make it out unscathed in the sense that she walks away with her life? Why does he never kill her? Why is she still alive? Why is she not one of the part of the carnage that he created?
Well, that's exactly the question of the movie. There is no clean answer to that, and perhaps the only people who know that are Liz and Ted.
Right.
Liz did ask him that. That is real dialogue. There is an account where he, when he would have these urges, as he calls them, he would get out of the house. He would get away from her. He knew enough to stay away from the people that he cared about. Now, whether or not those were actual feelings or just kind of a well-controlled sociopathology, that's another debate too. But it's a tricky question because it requires attributing an answer to something that's unanswerable. Nobody knows. I mean, you could make the argument that maybe because she was humanized in his world, she wasn't just an object, she wasn't just something that he stalked and killed, that caused him to have different feelings towards her. I don't know if that's true. Psychopath it is. But I don't have those answers, and I think that's an interesting debate to be had after the movie, is whether or not this love existed, whether or not a psychopath is capable of love, and whether or not you think that love is true.
Yeah, that is such a great debate, because my girlfriend and I were talking, I want to say, for an hour after the movie, and that's an effective movie, Michael. That's when you know you've hit a home run, right? When people talk about it after the fact, you've given people that forum, so that's when a movie has absolutely achieved its goal. Am I right on that point?
I think I'm excited that there's been a lot of conversation. It's been a very polarizing movie, but one thing that it's not, one thing we can't accuse anybody of being is indifference. People have a strong opinion, and I think that's a healthy thing. And I think if it causes debate and it causes conversation, that's a good thing, because there is a lot of conversation about a lot of difficult issues that we need to be having as a country.
Yeah, and one of the things I had to ask you was, the irony that women kind of followed him in the courtroom, where that's all he's killing is women. And I get that he's a rock star, he's a good-looking guy, certainly knows how to schmooze and treat people. I just thought the irony of him having a large following of females, when that's all he's been... Like, he's not killing just anyone, he's killing strictly females. I just thought the irony there is kind of just odd. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's very strange, and there are so many things that are strange like that. And I want to emphasize that none of that was embellished for the sake of drama. I mean, we were reporting the facts as they were.
Yep.
And it was just an odd time, and there are eerie parallels today with how the general public devours true crime in general, how the media treats certain criminals and cases. Joe Berlinger likes to talk about Bundy as being the Big Bang of true crime, and how you can draw a straight line from Bundy to the OJ trial, and you can extrapolate that to Amanda Knox, and you can pick your fascinating case of the week. It kind of all began with Bundy, and Ted knew that. He saw the camera in the courtroom. He understood the power that wielded. He was aware of his behavior and his looks and his charm, and how he could use that to his advantage. And have we learned the lessons of that today? I don't know. I think that's another conversation to be had.
Yeah, and I don't understand how that works. And you're right; it's a conversation that'll never have an answer. I have to say though, as a screenwriter, do you have contact with the actors? Do they ever say to you, how would you say this, or what's the appropriate way to, or is that something that goes through Joe? How does that rapport work?
It would usually and primarily go through Joe, because you want to have a clear line of communication. You want to have a single vision on set. There were times where actors would come up, or that I would workshop some things with actors. There was a moment on the last day where I was rewriting some of the closing arguments for Zach and Jim Parsons, and we were doing that. I know Jim Parsons had a couple line questions specifically for his prosecutor role. It all depends, but when we were in production, the schedule is moving so fast, and the director is pulled in so many different directions that there were times where I was available to answer questions. And if it was something that was too strong of a creative choice, I would always have to defer to him for natural reasons, because we want to have everybody on the same page.
Yeah, the last third of the movie for me is just, the whole movie's a home run, but absolutely just it's a phenomenal ending. And I have to say, there's just, you never really see his mask slip, right? He's always kind of schmoozing his way. He's kind of always, deceiving people. And I mentioned this a little bit before, it slips once when Liz kind of wants to be released. I mean, it's a very difficult scene to watch because she's so captivated by him, but it does slip in that one moment, and clarity is given. So, I mean, that had to be a scene to write that was very emotional for you too as a screenwriter.
Yeah, that was actually one of the very first things that I had before I wrote the script. I knew what the title was, I knew what the tone was, and I knew how I wanted to end it. And so I was always writing towards that end in mind. And at that point, it kind of becomes an issue of reverse engineering everything so that all of the drama beforehand builds up to support that moment. And that specific moment that you're talking about, without getting into spoilers, we always kind of talked about it as our I love you moment. It's the one moment. You could call it honesty, you could call it further deception. That's up for debate as well. But we knew that was a moment that was going to be a turning point in their love story. And we tried to build everything to support that.
Yeah, and Joe is dead on when he talks about comparing it to OJ, because people were rooting for him to escape, right? People wanted Ted Bundy to escape. He did it twice. People were cheering for that, like they were cheering for OJ to kind of just keep going. Is that an accurate statement, Michael, you think?
It's accurate because you have to remember, in the time that this was all happening, and even after the convictions, Ted Bundy was not this mythic archetype of evil yet. The true scope and depravity of his crimes was not yet known. And so, people were on his side. They thought he was wrongfully accused. He did have plausible deniability for many, many years. There was very little physical evidence. And it was broadcast to the media in a way that we had never seen before. So yes, the people were rooting for him. And it was only years later when the full picture started to emerge, and when Ted Bundy suddenly became this legend in cultural lore, that people understand that he is above and beyond the evil that even they could have expected back then.
Michael, is there a part of the movie that is even you're so blown away by that it presents you more clarity than when you wrote the script? So in other words, is there a part of the movie that you were just so blown away by how accurate it was when you put it on paper. Is there a scene like that for you in the movie, or are there many scenes like that for you?
It's hard for me now to see it objectively. I see the movie as a whole, and I think in the totality of the movie, I'm just so grateful for everybody's talents coming to. It's a case of 1 and 1 makes 3. I think it blew my mind the first time I saw it. Which even during production, I was watching the dailies every single day. I watched every single take that we shot, every frame, and I was just constantly impressed by the work that went into this by everybody, and to see it all put together. Like I said, in the best version of it, it has replaced my own fantasy of what the movie could have been when I was writing it. I don't even remember what that looks like in my mind anymore. It feels both exactly like the original intention and its own brand new thing. And it's really gratifying to see that.
And I got to say, another person who I have not mentioned, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this, I cannot imagine anybody else but Zach in this role, but John Malkovich as the judge. My goodness. And this is the scene I was talking about. I'll be careful how I word this so I don't ruin it for anybody. But, when he's talking to Bundy, and I don't know if it's that I know John Malkovich can get really loud and, angry, so I know he's being reserved, but he's just so calm. And he's basically telling Ted Bundy, look, it's nothing personal. You're a bright young guy. You're a good lawyer. You know what I'm saying? You're a good lawyer. I would have loved to watch you practice in front of me. I got to say, Michael, that's when the tears were flowing. There's so many other reactions, especially being a televised trial. He could have given into the guys, people that were outside, wanting him to die right away. But the judge just took an even keel kind of you took another path, partner. It's one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in any movie in 2019.
Yeah, John Malkovich, his resume speaks for itself, but just this role in particular, he's just showed such subtlety and restraint, and he just has presence, and
yes, well said.
And the real character, Judge Edward Cowart, was a Southern man of faith, and he was a kind man, and he was a fair man, and he had a moral compass, and I think you needed an actor of the John Malkovich caliber to pull that off effectively. He had opportunities to go big, and he didn't, because I think it was more impactful to let the gravity of the situation carry the drama as opposed to a huge performance. And I think that is why, he has such presence, and he is a worthy adversary for somebody like Zac Efron playing Ted Bundy.
Yeah, you are much more articulate than I am. That's absolutely what I wanted to say, and you're absolutely right. And I hate to keep going back to OJ, but when you were watching the OJ trial, Johnny Cochran was auditioning for a role somewhere. It was so over the top. Where you just mentioned this judge was basically it's nothing personal. I have no animosity towards you. Take care of yourself. I'm crying at a movie about a serial killer. Michael, I'm really mad at you that you made me cry at a movie about a serial and Joe too. But it's so beautiful the way and what he sums up is a good summation about just Ted Bundy in general. What a waste of humanity.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that's a line that often gets overlooked. As complimentary and as respectful as that judge was, he also called it as he saw it, and that was that Ted was a total waste of humanity. He was the voice of moral reason in that courtroom. The judge was, and it cut both ways. He could be. He was very respectful of the fact that he was issuing a death penalty, but he was also a human being, and he had a soul, and he recognized that in other people as well. And he had a job to perform. He didn't have to like it, but he did it, and he did it with respect.
And I want to be very careful and I have a few more questions if you don't mind answering, Michael. I appreciate this. Oh, my goodness. So I have to say, I have to be careful about this question, but whether it's Carol or Liz or even the mom, should somebody have known sooner? Does love make you blind? Was Ted such an effective, used car salesman that he just put a wool over people's eyes? Should somebody have realized something a lot sooner? And I don't want to say what Liz does, but should somebody have realized sooner?
It's a good question, and I think it's kind of impossible to answer now in hindsight, because one of the things that Ted Bundy is responsible for is redefining the idea of what evil is and who is capable of evil. I think in this day and age, it's kind of obvious that anybody can do these atrocious things, and looks and status and all these things have no power anymore as far as deceiving people. But back in the 70s, that was not so. And I think Ted is who subverted all of those stereotypes. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting question to ask what were these women getting from him? But I don't want to put the blame on them. I think when you do care for somebody and when you do feel love for somebody, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And, Carol Ann wasn't just a woman who came in the 11th hour. She and Ted had worked together. They had a history together in Washington for years prior to that. So she wasn't just coming in like somebody who found him online and wrote prison emails. She actually cared about him as a friend first, and it evolved from there because Ted had very few people in his life at that point. But again, that's a long-winded way of answering your question with an I don't know.
And I have to say, along the lines of the waste of humanity question, I hate this. It's nothing to do with you or Joe. People cheering outside the day he was supposed to be put to death. I'm not going to get political. I don't want to talk about death penalty. But I have to say, I just have a problem with that. I mean, this whole thing is just, sad. I don't know. I'm not okay with people cheering outside. I get what he did. And it's probably worse than people think. That's documented too. And Michael, I promise I'm not trying to get political, but I have such a huge issue with people just cheering outside. You shouldn't be cheering. This is just sad on so many levels and so many degrees,
Yeah, and we wanted to show the events as they were at the time.
Yep.
And that is literally what happened. And we're not making a comment on it. We're not making a judgment of it. And You're welcome to feel however you want to feel. And they're each equally valid reactions. I've had people come up and talk about the death penalty on both sides of the issue. And whatever you feel is fine. We as filmmakers didn't want to have a political agenda or a social agenda, or we didn't want to tell you anything. We wanted to present the story as it was and let you form your own opinions after all is seen and heard.
So I live in New England, right? And our sports are very prominent here, and you grew up in Milwaukee. Sports very prominent there as well. Many times an athlete will credit a coach and saying, coach drew up a play, this and that, and it's a very kind statement. Have you ever had an actor say to you, "My God, Michael, that was just such an awesome line. That's such a well thought out, and thank you for that." Have you ever had an actor do that to you, or compliment you, or has that ever happened to you? It's kind of an embarrassing question because I'm putting you on the spot here, but has that ever happened to you?
It's interesting. You can typically tell actors who have a history in theater and TV. Because it is so reliant on the writer and the writer's intentions. And in that respect, I can tell a difference as far as how they operate and the way they treat the text, which is not to say that film actors are any less respectful of it all, but it's interesting to see how they work differently. But we had a phenomenal cast and crew on the set, and there were no. This was not a get-rich movie. Nobody was doing this for a paycheck. People were doing this because they believed in the material and they believed in what we were doing in the bigger sense. And so everybody was just a pleasure to work with. And I'm not just saying that as some political answer. It truly was a team effort, and we all felt like one big family while we were doing this.
No, and I'll back you on that. I mean, and I'm not. There's some Netflix things that come out, and I have a big. I can't watch, but this is one of the best I've ever seen as far as a movie goes on Netflix, and people are doing themselves a disservice by not watching this. My last two questions to you are this. You mentioned you were at I think it was a Q&A after a screening. What's one of the more interesting questions you got? I mean, I'm peppering you with some pretty bad ones, but what's a good question you've gotten from an audience member after the screening that made you do a double take?
A double take? When I was in Milwaukee recently, I had a young woman ask me if coming from Milwaukee, and she called it Dahmer country, whether or not I thought it was in my DNA to gravitate towards serial killer stories. I thought it was a funny question. Funny in the sense that it is a bit preposterous. I mean, of course, couldn't be further from the truth. I grew up during that time. I remember that vividly, but it did not work its way into any motivation I had for telling this story. And in fact, I think more the opposite. As I said before, I was interested in exploring a serial killer story with no serial killing in it, just as kind of a writing challenge. And could I tell a love story and make the audience fall in love with somebody that they know was a monster? I look at it, bringing it back to Jaws, I look at this as Jaws as a love story where you don't see the shark for most of the movie.
Right.
But you still know, people have seen Jaws 300 times and you still know what happens and you still know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, but there's still a thrill ride to go on. And that, at the end of the day, I just love a well-told story. This happens to be in a dark true crime arena, but if it's a well-told story, I'll go along for the ride.
And it's a great perspective. It's a great point of view. I've never seen anything like it, and it's so worth the watch. I know about Lost Girls 2019. Is there anything else that you'd want to get out there and share with us?
There's not much I can share about that just yet. We're in post right now. I believe it'll be out later this year. It's also going to be available on Netflix. That was directed by Liz Garbus, another fantastic documentary filmmaker. And this stars Amy Ryan and Gabriel Byrne. It's another look at a real unsolved true crime case, a horrific case, but it's told through the perspective of the mothers of the victims. And so it's another interesting POV into an otherwise predictable story. And I'm really proud of the work that we did, and I can't wait for people to see that.
So I lied. I have one more question. Is there a true crime movie, whether it's Seven or anything that you absolutely love? Is there? And we talk about Jaws, I get it, but is there another movie that you really gravitate to that you, as a fan of cinema, that you just absolutely love?
Oh, I think, if we're talking about not just the serial killer genre, but true crime and just a well-made movie in general, of recent memory, Zodiac comes to mind. I think that is Fincher's masterpiece. I watch that at least once a year. The filmmaking is phenomenal. I'm riveted by the story, even though it runs almost 3 hours. I just think it's so well done. It's so well researched. It's not gratuitous in a way that shows anything beyond what we already know through the evidence. That was a big influence. I love that movie.
Yeah, and speaking of David Fincher, I believe he did Mindhunter, which is also on Netflix, and what a wonderful back-to-back that would be to see that and the movie you just wrote for. So I have to say, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show today. You're such a wonderful guest, and when you pick up your Academy Award, I'm going to be a little bit upset if my name is not mentioned, but thank you so much. We learned so much about you. What a wonderful movie. What a wonderful accomplishment. You have such an amazing future ahead of you. I wish you nothing but love and success down the road.